Right now on Upfront.
The battle for 2024.
We need to finish the job.
Democratic State Party convention underway this weekend in Green Bay, Wisconsin's U.S. Senate, and the presidential race front and center. Our guest this Sunday, Democratic State Party Chairman Ben Wikler, Marquette Law School poll director Charles Franklin on the road ahead.
Then a deal struck.
And that's where the late nights, the long days, and a lot of information started to come in.
Months of negotiations, a Republican ultimatum. Republican leaders and Governor Evers reaching a sweeping agreement meant to save Milwaukee from a fiscal cliff. Lawmakers now set to vote this week.
Speaker, do you have the votes in the Assembly without the referendum?
We had a caucus this morning.
J.R. Ross with new reporting on what's next.
And the presidential field growing. Another indictment for former President Donald Trump. Now a new group fighting election deniers. Kathy Bernier, the former Republican state senator leading it all, is here today.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. A wild week in Madison. We do have new reporting on what's next with a shared revenue bill coming up in just minutes.
But first, Democrats wrapping up their state party convention today, and already eyes and efforts on 2024. Ben Wikler is chairman of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. He joins us from Green Bay, the site of this year's convention. Hey, Ben, good to see you.
So good to see you, man.
Ben, as delegates are leaving Sunday from Green Bay and they are headed home, what is your goal and what is your need from them, especially since we are already in 2024 mode?
This is a moment of party unity. Our convention theme is working hard for Wisconsin, and that is what every Democrat has to do, just as Senator Baldwin does every day and President Biden and Vice President Harris. This is a moment where Democrats have been winning over and over, but where we cannot take anything for granted. We are ground zero, the center of the political universe in 2024 for the White House, for the Senate, for the U.S. House, in our state legislature. It's all hands on deck.
The Republican National Committee this past week launched what they're calling a major undertaking, especially in key battleground states like Wisconsin, getting Republicans to the polls early to vote early, more so than they have done in cycles past. How does this impact or change your strategy for the ground game in Wisconsin?
For a number of elections, we've had this unusual advantage where the Republican Party was essentially intentionally leaving tools on the table. It wasn't using the early vote and absentee vote opportunities before it. I think that has to be expected to be gone now. Republicans are getting their act together. They've had some moments in the wilderness. They're going to come full force. The fact that they've put their national convention in Wisconsin, their first presidential primary debate in Wisconsin, shows that they know that Wisconsin is the key to being able to win at a national level. So I think for Democrats, we cannot take anything for granted. This is not a moment to rest on our laurels. It's a moment to think about new ways to turn out voters and persuade voters so we can go beyond where we've been.
What do you mean by new ways in turning out voters?
Well, one example, so much of our work is based in geography. It's knocking on the doors of your neighbor, and that is absolutely essential. We'll be doing it at record numbers this cycle. But we also know that so many of our relationships are not geographic. They're based on, our little league games or our church or friends from our high school or middle school. So we're going to be reaching out to people through their existing social networks, making sure that the calls that people get come from the person that they're most likely to listen to. That's called relational organizing. It's one of the building blocks of victory for 2024.
You mentioned the U.S. Senate race, critical not only to the state, but the country. In the U.S. Senate, Senator Baldwin seeking re-election. You recently tweeted, "Don't sleep on this race. Expect a margin as narrow as finely grated cheese and prepare accordingly." On Friday, Congressman Gallagher said he is officially out, not running. What does that do to this race?
Well, it shows that Mike Gallagher took a look at the electorate, which just rejected an anti-abortion extremist in the state Supreme Court race and embraced somebody who was very clear about her values, believing that abortion should be the choice of the person who's pregnant. And now we have a congressional member who has a far-right anti-abortion voting record deciding not to run for Senate. I think it puts other Senate candidates on notice that this basic question of personal freedom, whose decision it should be. Should it be up to the women of Wisconsin, to people who actually are carrying pregnancies and their doctors, or should it be politicians deciding these basic decisions? That issue is not going away. And at the same time, This is Wisconsin, where both sides tend to start at 48% unless something goes terribly wrong for one side or the other. So I think we have to go into this remembering what happened last year with a 1 percentage point margin in the Senate race and prepare accordingly for 24.
You had two resolutions Democrats discussed this week and that I want to ask you about. One was called Messaging for Rural Wisconsin, the other Winning Strategies in Rural Wisconsin. Is this an acknowledgement that Democrats have lost rural Wisconsin?
This is an acknowledgement that voters in rural areas are essential to Democratic victories. 42% of the Democratic voters in Wisconsin come from small towns and rural areas in our state. And leaders like Tammy Baldwin, like Governor Evers, know that for a Democrat, you can only win statewide if you spend time in rural areas and small towns as well as the bigger cities and suburbs. There's a lot of talk, rightly, about the swing vote in the WOW counties, about the surge in turnout this spring in Milwaukee and Madison. But that's not enough. This is a state where you have to show up in every community. And that means listening to the voices of people where you may have to drive an hour to get to a grocery store. For Democrats, making sure that we're not just caught up in Twitter or what's happening on national cable news, but actually grounding ourselves in the lives of people in every corner of the state is the recipe for success.
Is this an acknowledgement Democrats need to do better in that part of Wisconsin?
In the last couple of election cycles, we've grown our rural vote, not by a ton, but by enough to be able to tip the scales on a statewide basis. We're going to keep working to do better. I think that the key thing is always keeping our ears open and our shoulders to the grindstone.
You mentioned the RNC. Wisconsin is going to be dead center for the presidential race. New national Marquette polling showing a majority of Democrats, 57%, say they don't want President Biden to run for re-election. That can't be a promising number as you go into 2024.
You know, President Biden has this record of accomplishment that is extraordinary, and he's done it in a fairly low-key way. Sometimes you get the most done when you're not trying to take credit for it every second of the day, a memo that Donald Trump might enjoy reading. If you look at what's been happening with the CHIPS Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the drop in inflation, and the enormous growth in the number of jobs and the quality of jobs across the country, these are things that any president would be thrilled to run on. At the same time, as President Biden often says, don't compare me with the almighty, compare me with the alternative.
Coming off an incredibly busy week, Ben Wickler, chairman of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. Ben, like always, thank you.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Let's bring in Charles Franklin now, Marquette Law School poll director. Charles, it's good to see you.
Good to be here.
So let's talk about Democrats and the current mood ahead of 2024. What is that current mood for Democrats?
Well, I think it's guardedly optimistic. On the other hand, Democrats are still not super excited about Joe Biden running again. On the other hand, when asked to choose between Biden and any of the Republicans, those Democrats unite behind Biden.
What do you think is the biggest challenge for Democrats heading into 2024?
Well, I think one would be a potential complacency. I think with recent Democratic victories here in the state, there may be a sense that they've got this in the bag. But if you look at our recent very close elections for president, recently for senator, then I think there's reason to say this state is still very much a swing state that could go either way, notwithstanding the big wins for liberals in the Supreme Court races lately.
What is your data showing you about any division within the Democratic Party and among its voters?
Well, the biggest one is simply that there's a sense that they wish there was an alternative to Joe Biden, largely because of the age issue. When we ask Democrats if they're favorable to Biden, Democrats are actually a little bit more favorable to Biden than Republicans are to Trump. So it's not that Democrats are in any way turning against Biden, but I do think at this early stage of the campaign, they have reservations and wish they had a younger candidate.
On the flip side of that, what do you see as the Democrats' strengths heading into 2024?
I think one is surprisingly turnout. Democrats have really increased their turnout in recent years, and the shifts within the parties have come to favor the Democrats a little bit more on high turnout races. It used to be a weakness for the Democrats that they couldn't turn out all of their voters. Recently, they've been doing a better job of that.
A lot to watch in the months and the year and a half still to come. Charles Franklin, always good to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, a deal reached a dramatic 24 hours inside the state capitol. Now a looming vote just days away. J.R. Ross with his new reporting on what's next.